Mom Jeans podcast. I'm Nicole, and today we have a guest. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Lori,
And you
and
have two, right?
I have
Two kids.
two. Yes.
What are
Yeah.
their ages?
They are 4 and almost 2. So we're
Yeah,
coming right up on
he
that
is. I was about to say, when is his birthday?
in April.
That's
So
right. He's only
coming
a
right
month.
up on it.
He's only a month older than my youngest,
Right, right.
which is wild
I
because that means
know.
we almost have 2-year-olds.
I know. It's crazy because like the age progression, it just happens. But then I look at your stuff and I'm like, oh my goodness, he can't be that old now. Right? Like it happens so slowly for us, but as we're looking at other people's stuff, it just in a snap.
Yeah, it's like jumps. Yeah, it
Yes.
totally is. I was looking at old pictures last night because, well, the inevitable, your phone is too full of pictures, so you have to go through and delete some or back some
Right.
up. And I got to this time last year, and, he was, what, 10 months old? And I was
Oh.
just like, what is happening? It's like he couldn't even walk. He, like, my cat still lived indoors because once he started walking, she launched herself as an outdoor cat because she hates him. And I mean, seriously, like she's going to be 13 in April, and she relocated herself and reinvented herself as an outdoor cat because she can't stand him, which is so funny because he's the third, which means she literally chose him as her. That's the line in
Her
the sand.
nemesis. Yeah.
The
Like
straw that broke the camel's back, not the other two children in the home. Him.
not any of the other pets you've had. Him. Hmm. Man,
Say that.
she was not playing around.
Yeah. No, she was done. She was really, really done. Um, and I love that for her because, we just really love the boundary where she's just like, done.
She has her own
We've had,
personality. She always has.
oh man, she does. She goes to our neighbor's house and pretends like she's dying and pretends like she lays on the ground and howls until they come out and like pet her and feed her. And like, we've lived here for 2 years now. So like, they understand by this point. But for the first like 6 months that she was outside, they were like, what is going on with her? Is she sick? I mean, my beautiful neighbor is just like this really wonderful person. And she is just like, do you need me to help take care of her? Are your hands full? I mean, like, I can take over taking care of her if she needs extra supports. Like, does she
What
need to
is
go
this
to the
girl doing to this cat?
exactly. And of course, this. She is, like 20 pounds. She's incredibly overweight. Um, so she looks, and then of course, like she has allergies, and now she's put herself outside, so she's covered in just like yuck because she's like itchy and her hair's falling out. And I'm just like, I promise you, I'm a good cat owner. I just,
She
she's
just
not a good cat.
decided her life was over the moment he started walking.
Yeah.
She was
She's like,
willing
we're
to
done.
sacrifice all of the pain and
Exactly. I'm done.
yeah.
That's
Hmm.
fine. I'm done. It's really funny. But he is of course devastated because the other two, like Rory's the only person whose name we usually say on the podcast because
Oh,
she's old
okay.
enough to consent.
Right.
She loves cats, and so she was like used to sleep in the same bed with Rory. Like
Right.
Jinx was all over her. But my stepson, no. Like the cat didn't look at him. He didn't look at the cat. They're not friends. They don't really talk. But she still lived in the house with him.
Right.
It's just something about she's like, I'm done. We're good. And then of course Rory went to college, and she was like, I second my choice. This is another reason. Another
Right.
reason to commit to
It's like,
this.
there's nothing holding me there anymore.
Yep. Nope, we're done. So I have transitioned out of working in the mental health adjacent to social work field. So I
Hmm.
was, like when you and I lived in the same location,
Right.
I was working in a shelter. We were doing like, you know, working with like really vulnerable populations and domestic violence and human trafficking. Um, and you were working where exactly? Because you were doing like legit social work. Because I am not a social worker. I am like a mental health
Right.
professional. Like they're like yin and
I mean,
yang.
they're,
They
yeah,
connect.
yeah, yeah.
But I
They're
know that it
all
is
intertwined.
yes. But I do know that there is a very specific population of licensed clinical social workers who are like, you are not doing social work. You're not a social worker. And it is
And that,
very important as a distinction because it is
right.
hard to be a licensed clinical social worker, but you can still do social work and mental health in the social work field without being a social worker. So where were you in that
Yeah.
conglomerate?
Oh man. Okay, so when we were there, I didn't have any licensure. Before you get your master's, you can't be licensured at all.
Okay.
Well, in most states. Um, so I just had my bachelor's in social work, and I was working with CASA initially, um,
That's right.
which
Okay.
yeah. So if you don't know, CASA is court appointed special advocates, and they work with kids who have some extreme cases going throughout the court system. Um, a lot of them are looking at whether or not parental rights should be terminated. And the CASA is supposed to be an advocate for the child. I will say not every arm of CASA works that way. So,
Yeah.
but that is their intent and their function. And not every court system wants them to work that way. So you can see how things already are getting manipulated
Yeah,
and
the
taken out.
system it having worked so after moving from like the the more intense like um shelter work that I was doing and then moving to Nashville when I did like the family intervention
Hmm.
specialist job, like we walked with the families through the legal system in a completely different way than I originally did because before it was protection orders and reporting abuse and police reports and then here it was like you're already in the system, you're deciding what happens, like where the conclusions are going to land. Like, is there going to be a
Right.
termination of parental rights? Is this child going to stay in foster care? Is this child going to be adopted? Is this family allowed to adopt this child? That kind of. So it was like
Right.
two very different ends of the spectrum. And I agree with what you said, where there are different arms of the legal system that are like, I know you're supposed to be objective about this, but what do you think? And it's like,
Oh, right.
I can't say that. Like, it's
Yeah, and
not
it's
my
so
choice.
right. And it's so interesting because CASA functions very uniquely. Like it's a nonprofit, it's all volunteer driven, and then you have your workers that basically review volunteer reports and make sure that volunteers aren't overstepping their bounds. So it's kind of on an honor system. And if a so since it doesn't like it does have to follow laws, right? Like the laws that are set in place, but not to the same extent as like a guardian ad litem or the attorneys that are part of it in DHS or DCFS. Um, and so it's probably the most easily manipulated
Yeah,
arm of what's
the
happening.
softer side of it.
Yes, and because judges choose when to appoint a CASA.
Mm.
That's really the only time. Like you can't step in and say, "Hey, we were," because you can go observe court if you work with CASA, and so you can't step
Which
in and
is
say, "Hey, that was a really messy case. Would you like us to work on it?" The judge
hey
just has
man,
to
you might
say,
need some help.
right, right. The judge just has to say, like, I believe that this case needs more insight. I would like more information. And so that is all based on the judge being honorable and
isn't
the
that isn't that crazy how much in family court there is? And I we may have to have like an entire section of this sometime. Because the judges are unilateral in so many ways. And that can be a good thing where like they
Mhm.
can like I specifically had a case I was involved in where a guardian ad litem was not following any ethical principles, had gotten kind of caught up in some family drama, um, admitted openly that she was herself triggered by something and that was coloring her views. Um, and we had to fight to get the child an attorney ad litem. And that's a completely different person, where instead of this kind of objective view, an attorney ad litem is a child's lawyer. They do what the
Right.
child is saying. And that's a very particular case. But the only reason we could get that is because we were able to go to the judge and say, like, hey, this person is not doing their job. We need you to override them and
Right.
give us the attorney ad litem. And that was just bonkers to me, that like it literally came down to the guardian ad litem being a woman with an opinion and the judge being a woman with an opinion, and whichever one you convince is the person holding this child's rights in their hands. And it was just, I know that we have checks and balances, and part of both of our roles were to exist in that checks and balances, but at the end of the day,
Right.
there was a woman signing a piece of paper, and that child's right to have a say in what was going on in their life was just there
Right.
in their hands. Bonkers.
Yes.
Completely
It
bonkers.
is. Yeah, we hold like so much responsibility, and I think it so quickly gets I think so many professionals very quickly get cold to what the realities are,
Yeah.
and maybe kind of forget that they're working with little humans and families and very significant lifelong impacts. Because I mean, we know what happens. We see the research and what happens when a child is separated from their family, and it is just not what we would hope. And so often the barriers that they face are simply taken care of if people just have access to resources. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the judges have just an absurd amount of control, it seems like at times. And it is often what it comes down to is they'll set parameters in place, but there are times when things come down to personal moral decisions. Like,
Yep.
yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do to make sure that someone's on the right track, and whether they need to seek services for addictions, or they just need help with housing. Obviously
Mhm.
those things are very clear and cut, like very clear cut, but then there are other things where it is shocking the amount of freedom they have to make a choice
Yeah.
for
I will
these
never
people.
forget. I will never forget. I was in court for a different case. You know, they kind of try them, not try them, but you're all kind of in family court. You're all in the gallery together.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's like you're waiting for your court case to be called. So you're watching other cases, which
It's like,
is
yeah, it's like
also
traffic
kind
court,
of
right?
insane.
Like
It is. Traffic court is the other, that's the other time where you're literally just sitting there open waiting.
right.
Um and you're literally having to explain to this child, like, I know you know that person from school, but just try not to like eavesdrop. That was always my job,
Right.
because my job was to sit with the child and be like, please don't repeat everything that you hear today at school in 30 minutes when you go back. Um but like I will never
I'm
forget.
trusting a 10-year-old's discretion here.
Exactly. And I will never forget, I was at court one day and it was 3:30 in the afternoon on a Friday, and a judge was kind of waffling back and forth on if this child could return home or if this child needed to go into emergency placement. And I will never forget, the DCS worker stood up and she said, respectfully, we don't have a home to take her to. So please weigh in your decision today, the safety of the child, but also the fact that this child has to exist for the next 3 days in whatever you decide in the next 10 minutes. And I had so much respect for that worker because she reminded the judge, yes, safety is so important in this case. And yes, something can happen in the blink of an eye that can jeopardize this child's safety. But also, this child will be sleeping on the floor in offices. I mean, this is blanket knowledge in America that children sleep
Right.
on the floor of DCS offices all the time. But she was literally saying, like, this child will go to a DCS office and sleep on the floor for the entire weekend, which also means a worker will be away from their family, sleeping on the floor of a DCS office based off of what you decide in the next 10 minutes. And I remember just thinking like it was 100% a catch 22.
Yeah.
Because for the judge, they're thinking, I have to make the best decision for safety. But that is really easy to rubber stamp. Safety, covering everyone's butts. Like, let's just make the safest choice. But then the actual logistics of, it's not just paperwork. There are people who have to make this happen at 3:30 on a Friday until we
Right.
can get back in court on a Monday or a Tuesday, and actually have these decisions. And that is always going to be one of the most fascinating things in the world, to
Right.
me, because it's true. Like you have to find. It's not like we have. Um, I had this worker that I worked with who was always like, I kind of wish we had orphanages. And I was like, no, 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 no. What are you talking about? And her logic was like, instead of having a stack of private homes for foster care that you have to go through and do all this stuff with, she's like, I wish I just had a safe place to just
Mhm.
take them so that at least. And I was just like, what a weird argument. But you can kind of see it again in her very black and white mind. And of course, she was a legal advocate, so there's
Right.
again kind of that separation. She had a little extra
Right.
distance. um but like I've always had that come up every once in a while again of like, well, that would be, there was an ease there of just checking the one location for safety
Right.
instead of all of these different, privatized kind of foster care. Because in Nashville, where I worked, you didn't really have, state organized foster homes. They were farmed out to these different companies that then
Mhm.
had workers and foster homes, and which was a whole other regulatory, like it just
Yep.
keeps getting more and more convoluted the more we try to improve the system. And it's still good to
Right.
try to improve it, but it just gets messier.
Right. I know. I've always said, like, I've always thought, and this is like, you know this as a teenager even. Like I knew this as a teenager. This system, especially, so I live in Oklahoma and it is a mess. It
Yeah.
is terrible, and we've known it for decades, and the federal government has said get your act together, and we still haven't because the wheels of government turn slowly. Um, but even as a teenager, I'm like, okay, why don't we just start from scratch? Why do we need to like yes,
Let's
okay,
go right back down.
certain laws, yeah, like certain laws and regulations and stuff like that on how these things are done, those were put in place for a reason. I'm not saying like let's just get rid of those, but let's see how we can rebuild the system that actually benefits the kids. And because I think we have a different priority than when we started this. The
Yeah.
idea then was we must protect children at all costs, but now we see the trauma involved. And, as soon
Yeah.
as we remove children from their families, and we see the long term effects of, well, we thought we were protecting them, but actually we were making it worse. Like we
Yeah.
have more research now, we have more information, and so we shouldn't keep playing off of the old information. We shouldn't keep
Yeah.
building these things because the system is so convoluted. There are so many people involved. Even in the courtroom, it feels overwhelming the number of voices that are involved,
Oh
and
yeah.
they're all like on behalf of someone, right? Like those people aren't
Hmm.
even the ones speaking. Um, and so
Yeah,
it
because
does.
you
It
have to
feels
have work. You have to prepare this paperwork, give it to the guardian ad litem. And then, oh, if the guardian ad litem is in a different case and can't stand up in court, you're not only presenting your stuff, you're presenting their stuff. Good luck. Um,
oh,
and the judge is
perfect.
like, why am I speaking to you? And you're like, well, because there's another case with another kid, and that person's stuck in that courtroom, and they won't let them leave because they're in the middle of talking. So I just got a text message. Congratulations. And like, it's just wild. So when you left Casa, where did you go next?
I ended up working. I did grant administration, so I was a special programs coordinator with Community Clinic of Northwest Arkansas. So I worked with Komen and Cancer Challenge at that time, and I was much more hands off during that period. Um, so it was a lot more. grant data and reporting and fundraising. Um, and I will admit I did love certain aspects of that.
Yeah.
Just being
I do
able
love
to do
I do
like
love
fun.
grant writing. It's a
I
very special like it's a very special version of like persuasive writing. It's a lot of
Yes,
fun.
it is. And I always like swore because okay, one of my internships was in grant writing. Then I was asked to apply to that job and I did. And I did it for a year and I was like, I've never want to do grant writing again. Like it's horrible. I hate it. And now I find myself like missing it because there's something about like the research and being able to put that tangible information out there to people and seeing like,
Yeah.
okay, look, certain things aren't going to work anymore. Let's try this differently. Now, my previous grant was very much not that way. It was like kind of a set in stone kind of thing because we
Yeah,
had
like
been
we're
working
just
with COVID and Cancer
reapplying.
Challenge. Yeah, exactly. It was like a yearly thing. And so, in that sense, it was very boring. And I spent most of my time just clicking in new data. And so,
Yeah.
I, that part of it was really awful because I missed the human interaction. I missed working with people. Um, so I spent a year there, and then I took some time off from social work.
Yeah. So what did that look like?
I moved to China and taught for 2 years. What did that look
Yeah.
like? I just left the country.
I left America
Oh
behind
yeah. Hmm.
because no thank you. Um
Yeah. And every day I regret coming back.
I was about to ask, how do you feel like your time in China as a teacher? Because obviously, were you still working with like children or were you working with adults in China?
I was working with children. So actually, it is really interesting because so much of my social work information and like everything I had learned came into practice while I was a teacher. And I think any social worker or any mental health worker would tell you like when you're working with children, if you have that background, it's going to help. You're
Yeah.
inevitably going to use it. And our
Which
school
is
was small. Oh,
which
sorry,
is
go
where
ahead.
we're going with this because I
Yes.
truly believe that if parenting had a manual, there would be an entire section. That's just like a
Yes.
a condensed version of what you learn in the mental health and social work adjacent like family service work. Um
Right.
because like I always say like parenting does have a manual, but you have to go to college to get a child development and social work degree. And then you
Right.
have
Yes.
your parenting manual. Yay.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that was like, it was so interesting seeing how those things fit together. And, we were working very closely with the families. The families were very involved. They put a heavy emphasis on education. So they really wanted to know how their kids were doing. And it was really interesting because you have the cultural aspect as well of like, well, I think that they're kind of upset. They'll be okay. There were certain things where it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter, it's fine. And so you're like trying to break, not that they didn't care about their kids because they love their kids very much. That's why they put such a heavy emphasis on education because
Yeah.
that is the key to a lot of them. And we were working at an international school, so it wasn't just Chinese students. Um, but education is the key to a good future, and so that is their way of like very deeply loving them. And you see this love take form in different ways in different cultures and different places.
Yeah.
And so that
And
was
they're like
really interesting. That was like a really fun part of working there, and getting to interact with families and getting to work with these kids. And of course my brain is trending towards the social emotional. And you know as I'm working as a teacher, I'm like, let's make sure we include these things and that you guys are healthy, and that your brain is primed to actually take in new information.
yes.
Um,
That's such a big part of teaching, and I really want to explore that more. I'm working on a course right now. I'm launching a course that's basically like preparing your pandemic preschooler. And it's a
oh,
little late. It was supposed to come out last year. And I have a 2-year-old, so of course that didn't happen. But it's all based on the fact that our children and really all ages of children, but there's a giant 2-year gap in social emotional learning. Like even if their education, which I live in Tennessee, and we have gotten so many dings right now because their education did not stay on track. But
Right.
and I think that's probably true across the board for a lot of states, especially kind of the southern area that we're in,
Mm-hmm.
Tornado
Yep.
Alley.
Yep. Yep.
But
Mm-hmm.
it is really interesting because so much of my course is like, you don't have to teach your child that their ABCs. There is a teacher in the room who has wonderful skills to teach your child what they need to know.
Yeah.
The problem is right now that your child will enter that classroom not able to learn unless you can help them reach the level that they need to be able to sit still, to be able to stay nourished with food, to be able to remain calm and regulated. I mean, I saw a wonderful statistic a couple years ago and then checked it, and it's still updated, that kindergarten teachers across the board identify um, ability to regulate emotions as the number one kindergarten readiness skill. And then I think about all of the kids that I've worked with
Wow.
and all of the kids that I've seen my kids go to school with, and even my own experiences in school, as long ago as those were. um you think about those kids who couldn't regulate themselves. You think about
Right.
those kids who stood out as not necessarily problem children, but as children who didn't do as well or
Right.
didn't fit in as well. And a lot of times it was because they didn't have the ability to even if they weren't healthy, they couldn't even mask it. They couldn't even
Right.
stay on this kind of plane of existence. And so that is literally what
Gosh.
my course is about, is like, while you're thinking about registering your child for preschool and here's all the questions to ask, here's everything else that we probably need to make sure that your child can do so that when they go to preschool, they have the opportunity to learn all of their numbers and their colors and their stuff that they will
Right.
need for education at large. And I've really enjoyed putting it together because I do have an almost 6 year old, and I did go through this with him when he was 4. And we did
Right.
sit down, and so much of that course, I was literally writing alongside getting him ready for preschool.
Right.
And I totally got my reward because when he got his preschool or when he got his little report card in December, his teacher was literally like, he is really doing well with his letters, with his counting, with his stuff, because he can sit there a little bit longer. Because even when he's having a bad day, he can and there's different things going on with him and potential neurodivergency and things like that, but it's really wonderful to hear that as somebody who so prioritized that, of like, we didn't have to sit down and harp on the ABCs. We didn't have to sit
Right.
down and harp on him being able to count to 30 or 20 or whatever the rules are. um,
Right.
and so, like, I love that you, in your teaching experience, kind of were able to infuse that, where, like you said, the parents love their children and they're thinking an education is the path to success. And it
Right.
is in so many ways, it opens so many doors. But as a teacher, you also know that education is not worth as much if you can't use it, if you
Right.
can't access it, if you can't sit there and be able to receive it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of love that. And I do wish that we saw that with more teachers, that they could kind of see. And I think there's this huge boost right now where people are trying to emphasize social emotional learning.
Right.
But obviously, we're in America and it's lacking by like a good 20%.
Right. Yeah, and you have some states that are like actually putting it into their curriculum and expecting it to be something that teachers are teaching, and some states that are now saying like my state is trending towards social emotional learning is bad, right? Like
I
these
know.
things they act like it's bad, and these are the things that prime their brain, that prepare them to take in new information. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was so nice in a lot of ways being at that school, because we were a small school. We had fewer students. We had our standards that we had to meet, but there was also a lot of freedom, I think, to just be there as a
Yeah.
human being for our students. And
Yes.
and that's, I think, the thing that we like. My husband was a teacher there as well, and that's the thing that we miss the most is we got to view them as more of a whole person because we weren't hit by the same constraints of the American classroom.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and their parents were very like, they were appreciative of teachers, and because they were involved with us, they weren't suspicious of us. They got
I
to know
know. There
us.
is a weird suspicion. There is a
And
weird
so,
suspicion.
yeah, what are your motives? And I would say like it's founded in some senses, right? Like we we know things have happened and we know that things aren't okay, but their level of involvement and the parents choosing to get to know us eased that a lot.
Yes.
And so it
That's a big
allowed
thing.
us to be there, and the parents were fine with it because like I said, they wanted education, but they also saw that like okay, when my kid feels comfortable with their teacher, they're more likely to learn. And so they
Yes.
knew it was a give and take. They weren't just, teach, 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 trying to get us to do all of those things. They saw how their kids were so much more successful when they had that connection with us.
Do you feel
Um,
like since it was an international school, maybe the parents were more aware of isolation that their children were facing, and so they kind of saw the more bang for the buck with the people who spend time with them? Do you feel like that
um,
is a thought process?
I think in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. It was an international school, but like 80 to 90% of our students were Korean.
Oh, okay.
So they had a Korean community, which is also like big, right? Like we know um, the youth suicide rate in Korea is very high. And so that was like very big on our minds. And
I
as we were
actually did not
teaching,
know that. I actually
oh,
did
okay.
not know that. That's
Yeah,
fascinating
it is one
and
of the
very,
highest
very
in the world.
heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's one of the
Wow.
highest in the world. And some of it is due to academic rigor. Um,
Wow.
and so, yeah, and I'm not sure, I will be honest. So it's been about 5 years since I've been there. I'm not sure if or how those numbers have changed with the youth rate, but yeah,
Well, I'm
it
sure
was
the
very
pandemic did
high.
not I'm sure the pandemic did not have a positive return on that, so that's even
Right,
scarier.
right. Yeah, and we don't know what that's like across the world right now. So yeah, I'm sure when that new data comes out, it will be very upsetting, just
Wow.
general. But yeah, we knew that at least while we were there, and that we had to view this differently. The parents were just so enthused about their education that, and they trusted us as professionals, and so that was really nice. I think that that was more their leaning, is trusting us as professionals and being really enthusiastic about education and getting to know us. Um, I don't think it was so much concerns about community because they had a
A good community.
a
That's
good
awesome.
community. Yeah.
When you say the terms like trusting us as professionals, it just brings up so much for me
Oh.
because even bouncing back to the court system, bouncing back to even working in the social work field, but even as um you know, I am a parenting expert, not because I am a parent, but because I've spent over a decade
Right.
working to become informed in this field. You know, we joked earlier about CEUs and we'll get to that in a minute, but like
Right.
we do have to keep updated on things. We are if you have a passion for this field, this is what you do. You know, my husband and I
Right.
laugh that I don't have a lot of hobbies, but I actually do. I have hobbies where I love to learn about working with neurodivergent children. I have hobbies where I love to learn about parents with disabilities and how to help them with you know, parenting and access to different things. And I always laugh that one of my favorite hobbies is keeping up with IEP regulations because Lord knows that's a full time hobby. Um, but I do see that all across the board that even when it comes to like working with your pediatrician and as a parent yourself, do you feel like you find that you have moments where you're working with an expert who is giving you advice about your child or maybe even raising a red flag about your child and you have this kind of knee jerk moment of like you don't know what you're talking about, what are you talking about? um I have to catch myself sometimes where I'm like,
Right.
you know, I see where you're coming from, and I that's where I think having the background that I do and having the background that you do, we can sometimes provide a greater context to things.
Right.
Um, so like for instance, I mentioned my stepson. We know that his mental health and medical professionals are suspecting neurodivergency, but on the flip flop, his preschool teacher absolutely is saying, he is astounding, he is wonderful. When you put that in the greater context, she's a
Right.
preschool teacher. She
Yeah.
loves that he loves to learn. She loves that he plays quietly. She loves that he's not, causing behavioral issues, because he does kind of prefer these, you know, more quiet, contained interactions. And
Right.
from a preschool teacher perspective, that is awesome.
Angelic child. But that's
Yes.
like, well, and that's the
And
thing.
it's
It's
like,
like, okay, you love it, but it's not normal. That like
yes.
level of
And that's
peacefulness that you're
what
getting from that child is not normal. So you love it, but it's kind of a self serving. I don't know. Maybe you should be more aware.
exactly. And so it is kind of this conversation. And we actually did have this conversation raised the other day of like, well, who's the expert? The medical and mental health professionals who kind of are all stacking up over here, or the person who spends 40 hours a week with him and does work with other kids his
Hmm.
age. And you can volley back and forth where that context applies. Um, but it's like, who's trained in what and who's the expert on what?
Right.
Because I don't think I would trust a pediatrician to tell me if my child is academically on the path, but I
Right.
also don't know that I would trust a teacher for their medical assessment. And so, from where you stand and your education, do you see gaps in that when you're working with professionals with your own kids? I mean, I know that.
Yeah.
So, your oldest doesn't go to school, does she?
Not right now. She has in the past.
She has
She's
in the
done
past.
like, well, like a child care school kind of thing. They had like classroom stuff.
What was
But
that like for you working with those professionals?
um I think she was so young that I didn't put a lot of stock into anything other than just like, did she throw a toy at someone today?
Yeah,
Right? Like those are the kinds
valid.
of things. Yeah. But those fears of like like seeing your child and what do they think, and I I do have trouble with that because I wouldn't even trust a pediatrician a lot of the time,
Yeah.
right? Because a pediatrician is only accepting the information that you're giving to them. And maybe they
Yes.
see some things in the office, but
And I think
our
that's
and that
common.
information, yeah, and that information is colored by how we view it.
Yes.
Um, so, you know, that is just one stage. If you say, I have this problem, hopefully they're referring you somewhere else.
Yes.
And I know that that's not always the case in rural communities. Um,
I
but
love a
hopefully
good
they're,
pediatrician referral. I love it when they say I don't
yes,
know. And they're like,
yes,
"Let's see, go to with my youngest when he was doing his weird little spider crawl, which I think you've seen videos of.
yeah,
It was you could look online and see that there were funky little crawls that kids do, and you could
right,
look on TikTok and Instagram, and all the parenting experts or the OTs on there would be like, "It's fine as long as they're meeting their other milestones." But still, going to the pediatrician, I set him on the floor and I was like, "He does this."
right,
Is this a problem? And she goes, I don't think so. But you know what? Let's have an occupational therapist look at him. And we did.
yes,
We went to the 30-minute assessment. He got to play on this like little foam slope thing, and they poked around on his hips for a second, and they were like, here's a couple of stretches you can do to make sure that it's not impacting his hip. If he doesn't learn to walk in the next couple of months, then go ahead and give us a call. We'll see if there's anything hindering him from walking. But I love to think of like all of these people as a team, because
right,
honestly, if at the point of anxiety that I was at, if the
right,
pediatrician had told me, well, here, just pull on his leg like this and stretch it, that'll fix it, I think that would have given me more anxiety than anything else. Um, and then, like, you add in, like, my breastfeeding journey and talking to lactation consultants, my pediatrician
oh,
didn't know squat about that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
so I had that lactation hotline or that lactation consultant, and I was like, "Looky here, call this." And that's what I tell so many parents I work with. Is like, if you have a member of your team who isn't an expert in this, find one. Ask your
right,
pediatrician. Ask for help, because the more people who have eyes on your child, you're you're not going to miss as much. It doesn't necessarily
Right.
mean that you are going to miss something with your child. You are the expert on your specific child. You are the person who,
Right.
like, as parents and even as step parents or adopted parents, that's been my experience with my kids, is you make it your life goal as a parent to know what's going on with your child. Like, that's where
Right.
you should be. When, again, joking back about my husband and his hobbies, I'm like, I have 3 hobbies. They walk around every single day. And this is my job. And
Right.
um and that's really hard from a perspective of, like, when parents have other things going on, like survival needs and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think from my perspective and working as long as I have in this field, I don't think I will ever turn down another member of my parenting team when it comes
Yeah.
to, and I know that that's not necessarily a popular opinion, because I
I
do
know.
know
Yeah.
it's hard to trust those experts, and, like,
Right.
it's also just hard to trust your favorite thing in the entire world to someone else who's not as invested.
Right. Yeah, that's like it is really interesting. I think it's easy to make the mistake of turning down help because, and especially in like an American society, we're all very independent. We tend to be a little bit more closed off than other societies. We don't have as much of the village mentality. So basically, we tend to we have this. I think it's also just a very American mentality of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Whether
Right.
we actually believe that or not, it shows through in things like this. So when you have an expert telling you something, or someone that's not an expert but has seen a lot of things, right? Like, and I think that that's a very important component. Like, okay, a teacher is not an expert on what disorders are, and they don't have a DSM, they've never owned one, right?
Yeah.
So a teacher is not an expert in that, but they've seen enough kids that maybe they can say, yeah, like this one, this kid is having trouble with this, and this. You might want to talk to your pediatrician. And then your pediatrician, and often through insurance, has to do the referral.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're lucky, you
Always.
can just, right? Sometimes you're lucky and you can just contact an occupational therapist or something for whatever it is. But I think it's so important, like you said, to have a network of people because it is that village mentality. And, it kind of brings it back around to that of, an early intervention, right? Like everything we know says early intervention is so
Yeah.
important. It
Those
has
first 5
lifelong
years.
effects. Yeah, and so if like I will admit, like I even made the mistake with my almost 2-year-old of I just felt like he didn't want to talk, and I didn't necessarily want to put him through therapy for that.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of like kicking myself because he still doesn't talk that much
Yeah.
and he wants to. And now he doesn't have the words. And so that's like one of those things where I consciously know, but looking at my child, I was like, he just like he's not a kid that wants to talk. And I think that that's
Yeah.
okay and he'll talk in his own time. But now, as he's getting closer to 2, he's getting more and more frustrated that he can't express himself. And so I wish I
Yeah.
had given them those tools in his tool belt at that time instead of waiting, right? Like that's very much my like independence and thinking, each child
Yeah.
is their own person kind of thing showing through. But I think when you see the effects, and so maybe that's my own little cautionary tale of like I knew better and I still was like, he'll be okay, right? Like he's his
Yeah.
own little person.
Well, and
And
I think the opposite is true, because having worked in the system, and we are going to talk about this on the next recording that I get with you, because I get you for 2. Yay.
yay.
But I I almost have the opposite, because I was so heavily involved in children's lives, and I was not a parent at that point. And
Right.
that had its own fight backs. Like, I got passed over for jobs because I wasn't a parent, and they were like, parents are not going to trust you because you're not a parent also.
Mm,
And there's that whole component right there. But
I have words.
by the time I know, by the time I adopted my daughter, having gone through the trauma that she had gone through, um, she already had professionals involved in her life, and being
Right.
welcomed onto the team by the professionals was so. I will never forget the day that her um, therapist called me and was like, welcome to the team. We are Team Rory. We are here. We want to make sure that she is okay. We are so glad to have you. And like, I kind of wish every parent had that. I kind of wish that every
Wow.
parent, like your
Wow.
pediatrician, so like my son's pediatrician is the woman who saw him 6 hours after birth. And like, I
Right.
still go to her, even though she was not the pediatrician we'd picked out, because we found out after his birth that the pediatrician we'd picked out doesn't see anyone under the age of 1. And so we were like, wow, we're scrambling for a new pediatrician. We really liked her bedside manner while I was in the hospital, while he was in the hospital. So
Yeah.
um, we just stuck with her. But that choice was kind of hard because we hadn't done the research. We didn't know much about her, and research is
Right.
important in that. But relinquishing that control a little bit, sometimes I remind myself, I've known this woman for 2 years. I've known this woman. She knows my child. She has seen my child. She went through the whole semi-racist situation where he's a brown child, so they thought he had jaundice, so they made us stay in the hospital longer, and then they did his blood tests and they were like, oh, his skin is just more yellow. And I was like, yes, because he's Hispanic. And they
Right.
didn't. And the reason that they didn't know that is because I was marked Caucasian. And it's like, wow, what
Right.
an interesting. And she was the doctor who walked in and was like, I hate to put it in these terms. And she looked right at my husband and said, like, I hate to put it in these terms, but they looked at the mother's paperwork and not yours and assumed that your baby was Caucasian. And so he looked like he had severe jaundice and was flagged for that. And you guys have
Just
had to
doesn't
stay in
have the
the
same
hospital.
pink.
Exactly. And you guys have had to
Right.
stay in the hospital an extra like 18 hours. And thank God it wasn't really, really long. But it's
Right.
like, she literally looked at my husband and was like, I'm sorry, this was a slightly racist situation, and
Right.
I will work to do better when I see him from now on. And she has never, like, she has always been really aware of that. She has always paid attention to that. When she met our other son, she even commented of like, you are so beautiful. I wish you'd been in the hospital with us that day. Like, there's a humility there. And
Right.
that went a long way to welcoming her onto our team,
Right.
because if she had just been like, well, it's y'all's fault because nobody flagged it back at us, because we were new parents, we were like, you say there's something wrong
Right.
with our baby, cool, fix it, please God, fix
Right.
it. Like,
Right. We trust you. Yeah.
exactly. And so I super wish that there was an opportunity to have. I know that you're supposed to go and interview pediatricians but while you're pregnant, but often that's not always the choice, and I wish there was some way to welcome. Like, I secretly love, and not secretly, but I do love when people are engaged with like doulas and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
even midwives, because in like England, talking about international stuff, in England, your midwife comes and checks on you like every 3 days. They come
Right.
to your house. And so you
Right.
immediately
Imagine.
have that village. You immediately
Right.
have that village of someone who saw your baby 3 days ago and can tell you, no, they are plumping up. They are gaining weight. It's very small
Right.
amounts. Your baby is okay. Your milk is coming. Like, just those little things
Ugh.
that we deal with as parents, who will look at the diaper and go, hey, your poop's fine. The poop is fine.
Right. Or
I,
like, the mental health implications of that too, because there's
yes, of
someone
not
seeing
feeling so
mom and
isolated.
her up and down throughout that
Yes.
period. Oh, yeah.
So I think it's interesting being on both sides. And that was one reason that I really wanted to talk to you about this, is because we've both been part of other families' villages, even some families who did
Right.
not want us to be part of them.
Ugh.
And
Coming in the next episode.
exactly. And then also, the other side of having to build our children's villages. And
Right.
um I don't know, maybe there's pros and cons, because maybe I'm too welcoming to other people on my village. I'm like, please come and see my child and tell me if there's anything wonderful or not okay about him. But there is something to be said for trying to rebuild the culture of village around motherhood and
Right.
around childhood. Um, and I think that's a really big thing.
And I think in regards to motherhood, something that is often missed is those people are seeing you too. And I think that that is so important because they're
That's
having
so big.
conversations with you. They're getting a pulse on how you're doing. And I think that that is something that is very easily overlooked. If you're in distress, if you have a good pediatrician, if you have, someone that you're seeing regularly, they're going to be able to say like, "Hey, are you okay?" It's not, it's crazy, it's incredible how it doesn't just surround the child, it surrounds the parent too.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective. Well, I'm happy that you're part of my village, and I'm happy to be part of your village, whether or not you like it or not. I've
Yes.
just I've just introduced myself. Hello,
you
I'm
you
part of
are
your village.
welcome. You're a welcome part of my village.
Um, you're a really good mom. You really are.
Here, thank you. You are a very wonderful mom.
All right, we'll say bye.